CountryWatch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories from across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood Coleman, and I'm the Senior International Affairs Analyst and Editor-in-Chief at CountryWatch. This week in my political intelligence briefing, with 1 week to go until Election Day, the United States is the featured country. Voting is already underway, and the country is seeing record early turnout. In addition, because of pandemic conditions, in certain states, voters have taken advantage of vote by mail. All indications are that the Democrats hold the advantage in early voting, but based on historical trends, Republicans will dominate the polls in person on Election Day. According to data from the United States Election Project, more than 60 million Americans already cast ballots by this past weekend. Now, we're on track for 70 million as of today. In fact, the United States Elections Project is predicting record overall turnout of about 150 million by Election Day. That would constitute the highest turnout in 100 years. This is an extraordinarily tumultuous time for our country, so too for our world. Among the other hot stories that I'm covering is the constitutional referendum held in Chile to reject the Pinochet-era constitution in favor of a new national charter. Chileans overwhelmingly rejected the old constitution, which dated back to the days of Chile's notorious right-wing autocratic leader Pinochet. Moreover, they ratified the drafting of a new constitution. The ratification of constitutional change was overwhelming, with 78% of voters choosing a new path for the country, providing pensions, healthcare, and educational benefits, while bestowing greater equal rights, particularly with regard to Chile's indigenous Mapuche population. Other stories I'm covering include the government formation process going on in Lebanon after the deadly Beirut blasts. The massive explosions in Beirut in August exacerbated the financial crisis in Lebanon, contributing to the public's fury and ultimately the resignation of the government. Forming a new government has not come easily. Finally, though, the pro-Western former Prime Minister Saad Hariri was named the new head of government. Hariri pledged to quickly form a cabinet of technocrats with the mission of enacting the economic and financial reforms needed to attract foreign investment. Another story I'm looking at is the chaos rocking Nigeria's biggest city, Lagos, amid anti-police protests. Lagos became ground zero of a massive protest movement in October over police brutality carried out by the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. The mass action expanded to include Nigerians suffering from socioeconomic strife as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. President Buhari's appeal for understanding and calm appears to have fallen on deaf ears. The landscape took a dark and violent turn when Nigerian security forces opened fire. Amnesty International said that they killed at least 12 peaceful protesters. The United Nations, the African Union, and the Economic Community of West African States have all demanded answers. Meanwhile, the coronavirus is flaring across the world. In fact, the new surge is promising to be potentially more widespread than the surge we saw in the spring. I'll be covering the pandemic more going forward because obviously this public health crisis is not going away. Some good news, though, on the pharmaceutical front for fighting COVID-19. The FDA has approved the antiviral drug Veklury, known as remdesivir. Finally, I am also, of course, covering the presidential election here in the United States. There's only 1 week left to go, and as I said at the top, voting is already underway. Anything can happen, and yes, President Donald Trump can still win re-election. But at CountryWatch, we like to deal with data, we like to deal with facts, and we don't ignore polls. And the polls show that Joe Biden has the polling advantage against Donald Trump. At the national level, Biden holds healthy leads against Trump in almost every poll. At the electoral level, there's some movement from last week. Trump is closing the gap ever so slightly in key states like Florida, North Carolina, and Arizona, but Biden still has small leads in these states. Trump's good news is that he's settling into a slight lead in Ohio. On the other side of the equation, Texas is officially a battleground state, so is Georgia. And Biden is solidifying his advantage in Rust Belt battlegrounds like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. In next week's political intelligence briefing, I'm going to do a 12-point series on why 2020 is not 2016 and why Biden has the advantage over President Trump, but let me reduce it to three key elements. One, Trump is no longer an abstract or notional concept. Two, Biden is not Hillary Clinton. And three, coronavirus. If you want to see how I forecast who will carry each state on November 3rd, check out my special election report accessible from the CountryWatch website at www.countrywatch.com. You can access it from either the Political Intelligence Briefing or the Election Central's website. I forecast at least 279 electoral votes for Biden. That 279 is a conservative estimate. Should Biden retain his small leads in Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina, he could well accrue up to 334 electoral votes, and that's not accounting for what could happen in states like Georgia and Iowa. But I'm sticking with 279 for now. I'm giving Trump a base of 182, but that includes an optimistic scenario in which he holds Ohio and Texas. Given the close margin in all the remaining battlegrounds of Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, and North Carolina, Trump could well win those states and add to his electoral vote count, but that would take him to 259 electoral votes, and he would still come up short. 1 week to go. I'll have my final forecast next week in an early edition here on Monday ahead of the election. A final note, for 20 years, I've written about countries of the world and about people who risk their lives. In fact, they risk life and limb to cast a vote and to know that it is very likely that that vote may not count. Here we are optimistic that our votes will count, regardless of your political persuasion. Don't take your vote for granted. Don't take your right to vote for granted. Be a participant in your democracy, in our democracy, and vote. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and remember that we live in an increasingly interconnected world.